Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of the Corbett Report. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com, coming to you, as always, from the sunny climes of Western Japan, here on the 27th day of September, 2013. Welcome to episode 282 of the Corbett Report podcast, the IPCC Exposed. Now, if you, like myself, have been following the public debate over climate science for the past decade, you will no doubt remember the hyperbolic media coverage that surrounded the release of the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's Fourth Assessment Report, aka the Climate Bible, back in 2007.
The world's top climate scientists couldn't make it any more clear. Global warming is real, it's getting worse, and we're to blame.
Climate change is putting the world on the verge of a catastrophe. That's the stark warning from the United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon.
What's in the report is sobering enough. Global warming is unequivocal and irreversible. Man-made greenhouse gases are shooting up, driving the rise in Earth's temperature and sea level, and the decline in Earth's snow cover.
You know, the scientists have done their work. It's now time for governments to do their work. It's time for Canadians to also accept their responsibilities.
For years, skeptics, including some in Canada, said the proof wasn't there, that the science was shaky. Well, not anymore. Climate change is becoming more obvious, the evidence growing clearer by the day.
There's a range of possible futures. At the low end, we could get a warming of about 3.5 degrees, which would be probably the fastest global warming in the history of civilization. But at the high end, the possibilities range up to a warming of about 12 degrees globally, which, in my view and the view of other scientists, would be disastrous. And we don't know whether we're going to get the 3.5 degrees, the 12 degrees, or anything in between. Obviously, government should be saying, let's plan for the 12 degrees and hope for the 3.5 degrees.
Yes, I think it's fair to say that the IPCC's fourth assessment report back in 2007 was treated by the media with the same reverence that would have been reserved in a bygone era for the Holy Bible. And I suppose that's particularly apt because it has been pointed out many times and deserves to at least be mentioned once again that there are numerous parallels between the religious dogma of old and the environmental dogma of now. Not only the fact that the fourth assessment report was repeatedly and consistently referred to as the Climate Bible by that selfsame media, but also that it represents, of course, an ideology in which the original sin of our carbon production can only be atoned for by buying carbon indulgences from the carbon priesthood. More on which later, but first sticking specifically to the science of the matter, because this is the point at which the proponents of disastrous man-made global warming always wants to come back to, and rightfully so. I think it's important to understand that the legitimacy of the IPCC's assessment report process to speak for some sort of scientific consensus has been repeatedly undermined in the years preceding the publication of that last report. And as one obvious example of that, we can point to the ClimateGate scandal that hit in 2009, and I will not belabor the point here. I will simply refer to people to my previous work on this subject, which I have done in numerous times in the past, and I will put the links in the show notes for today's episode so you can go and watch some of my previous ClimateGate reporting. But perhaps here, at the very least, we should note that when we say that ClimateGate was incriminating for the climatologists whose work feeds into the IPCC and in some cases are the lead authors of the assessment report, we use that word incriminating quite judiciously and quite specifically, because one of the interesting aspects of ClimateGate that the people who want to sweep that entire scandal under the rug fail to ever point out is that the UK's Information Commissioner in fact found that Phil Jones and the other researchers at the Climatic Research University at the University of East Anglia, Climatic Research Unit, at the University of East Anglia, actually did break the law by illegally withholding information from legitimate Freedom of Information requests that had been filed with the CRU. So they were in fact found guilty of breaking the law, but it was not prosecuted because by the time the Information Commissioner had received that complaint and the details of it by the ClimateGate scandal, it was already past the statute of limitations for prosecution. So these are really unconvicted criminals who have participated in this scandal, and that's one aspect of ClimateGate that needs to be pointed out again and again. And but ClimateGate, of course, was not the be-all and end-all of the undermining of the IPCC's legitimacy in the years since the publication of its last assessment report. In fact, there have been numerous scandals that have cropped up again and again to further undermine that legitimacy. And there's a lot to go through, so perhaps as a quick summary, let's turn our minds back to a Sunday update that appeared here on the Corbett Report a few years ago. In our top story this week, the UN's beleaguered Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is facing more troubles this month as some of its own lead authors strike out against it. Last Sunday, a paper co-authored by IPCC lead author Mike Holm went viral on the internet after it was pointed out that it contained a damning critique of claims that the UN-led political organization represents a consensus of 2,500 scientists. Claims such as 2,500 of the world's leading scientists have reached a consensus that human activities are having a significant influence on the climate are disingenuous, he wrote in the paper. In a subsequent statement last Tuesday, ostensibly clarifying his remarks, he wrote, quote, "Giving the impression that the IPCC consensus means everyone agrees with everyone else, as I think some well-meaning but uninformed commentaries do or have a tendency to do, is unhelpful. It doesn't reflect the uncertain, exploratory, and sometimes contested nature of scientific knowledge." End quote. Also last week, IPCC lead author Richard Toll added his voice to the growing ranks of scientists who feel that the IPCC process must be completely reformed before its fifth assessment report is conducted. Regarding the much criticized procedures for crafting the political report, Toll wrote, quote, "I think that the IPCC should suspend the AR5 process, fix the procedures for nominating and selecting authors, and postpone the report to 2015. I'd rather bet on New Zealand winning the World Cup." End quote. The much criticized organization and its procedures are currently under review by the Inter-Academy Council, and in a hearing last week at McGill University in Montreal, IPCC lead author John Christie slammed the IPCC defenders as gatekeepers who have become victims of groupthink. These criticisms come on the back of a series of scandals that have exposed the IPCC as a political organization writing reports for a specific political agenda. In January, IPCC lead author Murari Lal admitted that they had deliberately used a prediction that Himalayan glaciers would melt by 2035, a prediction they knew to be false, to put political pressure on world leaders. Also in January, it was revealed that IPCC predictions that global warming would destroy up to 40% of the Amazon rainforest came not from peer-reviewed scientific literature, but a World Wildlife Fund pamphlet written by a green activist. In February, it was revealed that IPCC had underestimated Antarctic sea ice by 50%. Also in February, it was discovered that an off-cited claim that African countries could see a 50% reduction in rain-fed agriculture in 10 years was also sourced from a political advocacy group. Also in February, the Netherlands protested that the IPCC fourth assessment report had claimed that 55% of their country was below sea level, with Dutch authorities clarifying that only 26% of the country is in fact below sea level. Recent polls show a rise in the number of people who believe that global warming concerns are generally exaggerated, with one poll showing that more Americans believe in haunted houses than man-made global warming. Now, admittedly, that was a lot of information in a very short time, and each one of those scandals that I cited there deserves looking into in and of itself. So, of course, in the show notes for that episode of Sunday Update, you will find the links to each one of the scandals that I was talking about there, so you can go and do some more research into it. But as damning as all of that information is, things got even worse for the IPCC the next year with the release of Donna Laframboise's groundbreaking research into the institution in her book, The Delinquent Teenager Who Was Mistaken for the World's Top Climate Expert. And she appeared on the Bolt Report with Andrew Bolt to talk more about what she uncovered about this august UN body.
Donna, thanks for joining me. Is the IPCC really made up of 4,000 top scientists?
Well, that's a fairy tale that politicians really like to believe in, but in fact, that's a very, very problematic number. The last big IPCC report was written by 450 lead authors with an additional 800 secondary authors. That comes to 1,250. That's a pretty big far cry from 4,000. So first of all, the number is problematic. And secondly, is it 4,000 of the world's top scientists? Well, I'm afraid it's not. I found out that some of the people writing this report are actually graduate students in their 20s. They're, some of them 10 years away from even getting their PhDs.
How could that
That's
happen?
not a top scientist. That's... You know what? I'm not sure. I think they just they didn't get any scrutiny. They really didn't. They said, this is what we're doing, and we're a collection of top scientists, and we all believed them, and no one bothered to double check.
Is it the case then that people are being chosen, some of the examples you give, people who hadn't even done their PhD yet, they're chosen because they agree with the opinion, not because they could prove it?
Well, you know, one suspects that that's what was going on, that in fact people were chosen because they perhaps could be easily led. They were young and could be easily led, perhaps because they had already expressed the kind of opinion the IPCC brass was hoping the report would express. It's not clear, but it certainly looks fishy.
And lastly, we were told that it relies on peer-reviewed science. That doesn't seem to be the case from what you seem to have established.
Well, that's the other thing. That's the other big fairy tale here. The chairman of the IPCC has been going around the planet assuring us that the reports are based only, solely, and exclusively on peer-reviewed science. Well, when I actually decided to check out how many of the sources cited by the IPCC were published in peer-reviewed scientific academic journals, only 2/3 were. And we also discovered that 21 out of the 44 chapters had so few peer-reviewed sources that that chapter would have received an F on a grade school report card.
It seems to me, Donna, what you also found out was a lot we were reviewing on green groups literature, and I think people really should look at what you've come up with, because I think it'll really startle them how thin this material is. Donna Laframboise, thank you so much for joining us.
Now, people who are interested in a more in-depth conversation with Donna Laframboise about her research and what she uncovered in the course of writing her book, I will refer you to the interview archives on CorbettReport.com for interview 434, where I had an in-depth conversation with Donna about that topic. So I will refer you to that interview and, of course, to her book itself for more on the scandals that undermine the supposed legitimacy and authority of this UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and its pronouncements. But just like in some bad horror movie where the killer comes back at the end despite having supposedly been killed off earlier in the movie, it seems that the IPCC is also coming back, and now it's preparing to release its 5th assessment report. Guess what, everybody? They're back, and it's almost exactly the same as what we saw in 2007.
We're going to begin with news that is hot off the presses, the latest word on climate change. United Nations report just released in the past hour says it is extremely likely that humans are mostly to blame for temperatures that have been climbing now for decades. How sure are these scientists? They say about 95% certain. And in science, 95% is pretty darn certain.
The report says there's now a 95% chance that the pollution we cause in the atmosphere is causing the planet to get warmer.
First, the IPCC declares that 95% certainty that humans are responsible for more than half of the observed increase in global average surface temperatures from 1951 to 2010. Some other major conclusions that they have that aren't that far off from their previous reports, but nonetheless emphasize and confirm previous findings that we can expect. They expect a range of temperatures in the next century to go up 1.5 degrees Celsius to 4 degrees Celsius. That works out to be about 6 degrees Fahrenheit. And also predicting a 10-inch to 3 feet sea level rise by 2100.
The IPCC report is expected to conclude with at least 95% certainty that human activities have caused most of Earth's temperature rise since 1950 and will continue to do so in the future. That's up from a confidence level of 90% in the 2007 report. The last year the assessment came out.